He bought the 19-year-old bride for $3 but she screamed when the cowboy kneeled. Jonah Cole never sought the spotlight. At 42, he was a cowboy of quiet habits, a sturdy man with weathered skin, steady hands, and a reputation for helping his neighbors without asking for thanks. The Harvest Festival in Broken Will County, Montana, was just another day for most, but for Jonah, it was a rare chance to be part of something bigger than his ranch, to see the small town buzzing with laughter, music, and dust stirred into golden sunlight. He had wandered past the charity auction with a polite nod, not intending to participate, until he saw her. She stood on the wooden platform in a thrift store lace dress, the kind that looked more like a costume than a wedding gown. Her name was Lila Hart, 19, with wide eyes that darted around the crowd, filled with nervous energy. She had signed up for the bride auction to earn the stipend that would pay for a flat tire repair on her old Buick. Most of the townsfolk treated it as harmless fun, a tradition to raise money for the county food pantry. But to Lila, it felt like being on display for the world to measure her worth. She had expected indifference. She hadn't expected anyone to bid at all. When Jonah's quiet voice offered $3, the starting bid, her body stiffened as if someone had shoved ice into her chest. $3. It was the smallest amount anyone could give. And yet, for the first time in days, someone had noticed her. Jonah didn't want to own her time or command her attention, he simply saw a girl alone in a crowded festival, trembling with the fear of being forgotten, and something in him refused to let that fear go unanswered. "I'll take that one," he said softly, tipping his hat. Lila's breath caught. She nodded mutely, feeling the sharp sting of disbelief and relief at the same time. They walked away from the cheering crowd into the warmth of late afternoon sun. Jonah gave her space, speaking in gentle tones, asking her nothing more than if she was comfortable. Her shoulders were tight, hands gripping the folds of her dress, and every few steps she glanced around, expecting a sharp word, a sneer, or some invisible danger. "People aren't usually kind unless they want something," she admitted finally, her voice barely audible over the distant strains of festival music. Jonah felt a pang of recognition. He had lived in that same world, one where kindness came with a price tag and trust was an illusion. He paused, letting the silence stretch long enough for her words to settle between them. "You're safe with me," he said, as naturally as the wind swept across the prairie. "I don't want anything from you, except to make sure you're okay." For the first time, Lila looked at him, not the neutral glance she offered most strangers, but a full, searching gaze. There was no trickery in his eyes. No hidden demands. Only steady warmth and a quiet promise, someone saw her. And for someone like Lila, that alone was transformative. They wandered toward the food trucks along the festival's edge, and Jonah noticed her slipper slipping on the uneven ground, the satin ribbon dragging in the dirt. Without thinking, he knelt to retie it. That was when Lila screamed. A sharp, involuntary cry that echoed years of reflexive fear, of moments when hands meant harm rather than help. Jonah froze, raising his hands in the air. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I just didn't want you tripping." His voice was calm, patient, without judgment. "I should have asked first." She covered her mouth, the tremble in her body betraying a combination of terror and shame. I thought," she stammered. Jonah shook his head gently. "It's all right. You're safe. I promise." He tied the ribbon slowly, deliberately, letting her see each careful movement. When he rose, Lila's lips quivered and she whispered, "Thank you." His smile was simple, unadorned, but it carried a weight heavier than gold. "Anytime," he said. By the time they reached the food trucks, Lila's nervous energy had eased into tentative curiosity. Jonah bought 2 burgers, curly fries, and oversized lemonades. She ate ravenously, pausing only to glance at him in disbelief when he said, "Eat. Nobody's judging." For a girl who had spent weeks living in her car and months in the shadows of foster homes, this small act of care felt monumental. Between bites, she confessed fragments of her life, kicked out of her home at 17, bouncing from job to job, sleeping in parking lots. Jonah listened quietly, nodding when appropriate, never interrupting, never pitying. After they ate, Jonah led her to the barn at the edge of his ranch, where Willow, a retired chestnut mare, awaited. "She's gentle," he explained. Lila hesitated, then reached out, and Willow leaned into her touch. Lila laughed, a pure, unguarded sound that surprised them both. "I've never touched a horse before," she admitted. "You'd never know," Jonah said. "You're good with her." In that simple interaction, Lila's shoulders relaxed further. The world, which had always felt sharp and threatening, began to reveal itself as a place that could hold kindness without strings attached. The sky darkened with the promise of an approaching storm. Jonah draped his denim jacket over her shoulders, its worn softness a barrier against the chill. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she whispered, incredulous. He looked out over the prairie, thinking of all the lonely teenagers who had grown up believing no one cared. "Because kindness is how you stop storms before they start," he said, "and sometimes life hands you a moment to remind another human being that the world hasn't given up on them. And maybe, sometimes, that moment is worth $3. Lila's breath caught as she absorbed the weight of his words. As night fell and festival lights flickered on, Jonah walked her back to her dented Buick. She tried to return the 3 crumpled dollars he had paid at the auction. "Keep them," he said firmly. "Someday, you'll meet someone who needs a small kindness. Use it on them." She nodded, clutching the bills like they were a seed of hope. "I will," she whispered. As she drove away into the dark Montana horizon, wrapped in his jacket, Lila realized that $3 hadn't bought a bride. It had bought a moment, a lesson in trust, safety, and the quiet power of generosity. That night, as Jonah watched the taillights disappear, he felt the rare satisfaction that comes from changing a life without fanfare or reward. Somewhere down the road, Lila promised herself she would pass the kindness forward. In a world that often overlooked the smallest gestures, that day's gentle human touch had created a ripple that neither of them could fully measure, but both would carry forever. $3 had bought nothing tangible, but it had bought humanity, hope, and the beginning of a new chapter.